Hello and welcome to the Cobra Class 4 user guide video. My name is Chris Andre and I'll be your host today. At this time you should have watched the setup video and have your machine completely assembled. Every 10 to 12 hours of use, we need to clean the lint off the machine and oil it. The easiest way to clean the outside of the machine is with compressed air and a shop towel. Now the bobbin shuttle. Remove the cover plate. Set that aside. Now we're going to take out these two screws right here. These are tension screws. They've got little springs behind them. We want to make sure once we get these out that we don't lose those little springs. I'm going to take a little tension off that side. And we'll go ahead and take this one all the way loose. Keep that handy. Take this one all the way out. Okay. Now to remove this, this is pressed in a little bit. This cover, we're going to get our screwdriver and there's a little slot right there. And instead of prying, we're going to twist that cover out of there. Lean it back and that shuttle comes right out. Just like so. Make a note of how it's in there. The hook is pointing counterclockwise. It's on our right side. Going to need to remember that when we put it back together. Going to use compressed air and a little flux brush. Kind of get in there. Knock any big stuff kind of loose, any little stubborn bits. Okay. We're going to inspect this. You're going to get a lot of buildup in this little hinge area right here. You're going to get a lot of buildup generally in this little gap right here. Again, blow that out. Okay. Take this out. We're going to check, make sure nothing's in our race. That's where our parts move. We don't want to use any solvents in here. We don't want to, strip any more oil out of there than we have to. Okay? So now we're going to put that back in, just like it came out. Alright. I'm going to take and put our screws back in so we can use them to align to the holes to make sure we get it in there just right before we press it. Okay. And guide that on top of the shuttle carrier. I'm going to press that in. Just like so. No tools, no hammering, just use my thumbs, pressed it in there. Springs down in there, we're going to go ahead and just run our screws back. A little bit too much there. I want to get this one going before I snug that one down. Keeps things from binding up when you're pressing parts together like this. Snug, not tight. Go ahead and bring that back down. There we are. Now we can put our dust cover back on. We are good to go. Now we're going to oil our machine. There are 13 oil holes marked with red paint. Using the oil that came with your stitcher, drop 3 to 4 drops in each of the 8 holes on top. The 3 holes on the arm and back of the machine. Always wipe your machine down after you're done. And the 2 holes on the back of the machine. This needs to be done about every 10 to 12 hours, just like the cleaning. It's best to just do them at the same time. Clean, then oil, and then stitch. Let's install our needle, a simple thing that can cause a lot of hassle if not done correctly. We'll cover size and application further into the video. Alright, here we've got our basic needle for our stitcher. This is a 794 style needle. When you're buying needles, regardless of size, you're looking for a 794 style needle. Alright, you can see that little flat spot right there as it goes by as I'm rotating it around. That is the kerf. The kerf is where the hook in your bobbin assembly goes by and catches the top thread. It needs to point directly at the back of the throat of the machine. We'll get to that here in just a second. I'm going to turn it around. You can see there's a groove right there. That groove is where the thread hides as it's going through your leather, so it doesn't wear your thread through. This goes to the outside of the machine. Ensuring the power's off, let's go ahead and install our needle. Here we see the needle arm extended out a bit. This is our needle set screw and our needle sight hole. Bring that back up, make a little space for ourselves. Going to install our needle with the groove pointing out. It's very important. That groove is pointing out, straight out. Can't be off to an angle this way or this way. It needs to be coming straight off the end of that machine, pointing straight out. Okay? I can see through my sight hole here that my needle's all the way in. I'm going to snug that screw down. Jam it in there, just going to snug it down. And our needle's installed. Now that we've installed our needle, we can go ahead and thread our machine. First, we're going to take our thread and run it through the eyelet in the thread stand arm and pull it over to our first tensioner. At the tensioner, feed the thread through the wire loop over the tensioner clockwise between the plates and pull an arm's length of thread. Feed back through the wire loop toward the second tensioner. At the second tension wheel, we'll run our thread through the wire loop counterclockwise around the tension wheel. We're going to wrap it all the way around one time and then back through our wire loop. Through our little slack spring here. Pull our slack out. From the slack keeper, we're going to go up and run our thread through the hole in our tension arm. From there, we're going to come through this little slack keeper over here. So a little slot in the back of that plate. Slip it right down through there. Pull your slack out. From our slack keeper, we're going to come down into this spring right here. Little keeper. We're just going to push that right past there, around, and now we're inside that little spring. Take the thread, we're going to stick it through. There's a little hole right in the front of the needle arm. Poke it right through there. Okay. And then finally, we're going to put it through our needle. It's very important, of course, that we take our thread from outside to inside through the eye. We don't want to wrap around anything or twist anything. Straight through the hole, straight through the eye, and out. Let's wind a bobbin. Preferably, we use a second spool for our bobbin thread. This allows us to wind a bobbin as we stitch, and we also don't have to unthread the top stitch to wind a bobbin. We're going to take our thread through our bobbin tensioner. We're going to come in from the back, around our tensioner, between the plates, and come out in the front. Pull some slack, feed it through our guide arm, and back to our bobbin. We're going to install the bobbin on the winder by locating the hole in the end of the bobbin with the pin on the winder. We're then going to take our thread, run it through the other hole, and drop our keeper. Never run your machine without material. Pull the top thread from the needle before winding your bobbin. Keep tension on the tail until the wraps come back to hold it in place. Now we can trim the tail, rethread your needle, and go back to stitching. The keeper will automatically pop up when the bobbin is full. It's important to note that the guide arm needs to point directly at the center of the bobbin. If you find that thread is building up on one side or the other and leaving a hollow spot, you know your guide arm is pointing at the high side. Installing the bobbin. First, remove your cover plate. Locate the bobbin shuttle release. Install your bobbin with the threads coming off the bottom, going into the slot. I've pulled my thread down into the claw. Pull a little bit of thread out. I'm going to grab my top thread, and we're going to get that thread, bottom thread up by using our hand wheel. No power. And we're going to bring that right around and pull it out the top. Just like so. First, we'll talk about needle tips. Most, if not all, stitching in leather is done with the chisel tip. The chisel tip cuts the cleanest hole and produces the same diamond-shaped hole as a stitching awl. The spear point needle is used for cloth. The point pierces between the fabric's weave without cutting it. Your Class 4 will comfortably run thread sizes from 138 and up. 138 is best matched with a size 23 needle. From here, needle and thread sizes go up together. 207 with 24, 277 with 25, and so on. Stitching with 69 thread is possible with an exception. The bobbin tension won't adjust down far enough, so what we can do is cheat a little by installing the bobbin backwards or over the top in the shuttle. Stitching is a combination of function and aesthetic, which leaves a lot of room for argument. Ask any 10 makers for a formula, and you'll likely get 12 different answers. What I'm looking for in a stitch is proportional balance. Here we have an example of 277 thread and 4 different stitch lengths in 14-ounce leather. To me, the 4 stitches per inch looks a little out of proportion. The stitches look like they're stretched out between the holes. Just doesn't quite look right to my eye. The 6 stitches per inch, this is what I use the most. It's what most makers in my experience, use. 5 to 6 stitches per inch. The proportion looks right. 9 is a little too close together. The proportion's going the other way now. If we were going to use an 8 or a 9 stitch per inch, we would probably go to a 138 thread to keep our proportion correct. 18, this is an extreme example. The machine will do it, but what we've done here is created a perforation. We took and bent this a little bit back and forth. It was a piece of working gear. This would easily tear out along here. There's just not enough material left to hold itself together. One could say the same for 8 or 9 stitches per inch with this heavy of thread. Might have the same challenge. Again, we want to go back down to a smaller thread, smaller hole, to keep the proportions right. You'll notice I'm using a 207 back stitch. A lot of makers will use a smaller back stitch just by one size. Keeps the back stitch looking more clean, a little more tidy, doesn't stick out as far, just a little bit nicer finish. Alright, now we're going to talk about how our needle travels and why it's relevant to our stitch length. As we're going down, you'll see it moves forward. See, you can see the foot and the needle move together, and they're coming in front of the presser foot, moving forward. It's going to get to the bottom of the stroke, and it's going to slide back. It's going to come straight up, and then it's going to go down forward again and catch our leather. This graphic illustrates why our stitch length gets shorter as our material gets thicker. As we've seen, our needle path comes straight up and then down and then across and then straight back up. So it moves forward right here. Because of the arc that it's moving on, it doesn't come over here and come down. It comes down through the middle. So we can see by the path illustration that up here at 3/4 of an inch of leather, our stitch length is going to be about 1/3 shorter than it is down here at 1/8 1/4. So anytime we're stitching thick material, we need to run a test and see how much shorter our stitch length is going to be and adjust accordingly. We're looking at our bobbin shuttle assembly. As we're stitching, anytime we want to shift into reverse and back stitch, stop and go around a tight corner, make any sort of adjustment while we're stitching, we always want to make sure that our needle is coming just up from the bottom before we do anything. Well, I'll demonstrate. So we're going to come down here very slowly, and we're going to make a stitch. Now we see our needle coming in, coming back up, right there. Starts going back up. Anytime after it's going back up, now we can shift into reverse. We can lift our foot and turn. We don't have to worry about dropping a stitch. What we've done by coming up off the bottom of that stroke is we've hooked our bobbin thread. Once we've hooked our bobbin thread, we're not going to drop that stitch. We can turn, back stitch, do whatever we need to do without risk of dropping that stitch. So when I'm talking about bringing the needle up past the bottom just a little bit to shift or do anything, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Making sure that needle is just coming back up from the bottom of the stroke. Stitch length adjustment and forward and reverse are done here. You'll notice on this bezel that there's numbers going from 0, 4, 6, all the way to 12. These numbers mean nothing at all. Not sure why they're there. Ignore them. For anything more than just simply a reference point on the scale. I have mine set at 6. At a 1/4 inch of leather, the 6 actually works out to about 6 stitches per inch. As we go up, our stitches get smaller, increasing the number of stitches per inch. As we adjust and go down past, we get fewer stitches per inch. Wherever we're at, if we go all the way to the top of the stroke, we will get the exact same stitches per inch in reverse. Now we're going to talk about presser foot pressure. This is our presser foot, the outside foot, and it's the one that holds the leather to the machine. It pinches it in there. We can adjust how much pressure the presser foot applies using this knob. The presser foot pressure adjustment knob is located directly above the presser foot itself on the top of the machine. I have it adjusted to where the top of the knob is about 1 inch off the top of the machine. This works for just about everything I do. I don't think I've adjusted this knob since I've had the machine and put it where it is. If you think you need to have more pressure, you screw the knob in, and if you need to lighten it up, you take the knob out some. But generally a good place to start is about 1 inch from the top of the machine to the top of the knob. Tension is the biggest challenge people have with this machine. First, we need to appreciate that this machine was designed to sit on a factory floor, stitching one thread, one tension, one weight of material all the time. As craftspeople, we may go from wallets to belts to skirting in a week's time. This means we need to have a little bit of adjustment. The first thing we need to understand and find on this machine is the home position. The home position is nothing more than a common place, an indexable place that we can come back to if we get out of whack. What we're going to do is take and measure from the face of this nut to the end of the screw and set that at a given distance on both screws. That's going to give us our top thread home position. The bottom thread, what we're going to do is take our tension screw and run it all the way to the bottom. We're not going to tighten it, we're just going to run it right to the bottom, and then we're going to back it off 180 degrees or half a rotation. That's going to give us a place to start from. We get out of control, we lose our way, We can always come back to those positions and have a place to start and adjust and get our tension. Alright, now that we've learned to find mechanical home, I've unadjusted the machine so the knots are coming out the top of the hole. If you look down into that hole, you can see thread in there. That's the actual top side of the bottom stitch. That's the top of the knot. We shouldn't be able to see that at all. It should just look like a black hole in there. So what we're going to do is break out our ruler and measure our top screw. Oh my goodness, 5/16 of an inch is what that says. So we're going to adjust it back out until it's 3/16 or home. Sorry about the top of my head again. There we go, 3/16 of an inch. Now let's run a little bit of a test. We're going to hold some tension on our tails there to help the machine out while it gets started. And use the hand wheel to bring my tension arm back up to the top, finish tying the knot on that last stitch. I'm going to pull slack out with my right hand right after the tensioner. I'm going to pull the work out the back so I don't put any undue pressure on the needle. When I lifted my pressure foot here, it took the tension off of our top thread, helped us pull it out a lot easier. Okay, cut the tails off here. Now when we look in there, we can see just barely see them in there. But they're nowhere near as obvious as they are in that row right before it. So now we can fine-tune it a little bit. We're going to tighten it, or actually loosen it just a little bit more. Maybe half a turn, maybe a little more. See if we can't pull that down just a little bit more. Finish tying our knot, step on the presser foot pedal, pull our slack, cut our tails off. Okay. I don't see any knots in there. Just to be safe, look on the back. There's no knots coming out the back either. I think we're pretty darn close. I think I can show it on camera, but I can look in here and tell you that the knot is hanging out just inside the back of this piece of leather, the front piece of leather. So I'm going to loosen this just a little bit more. Let that knot fall back a little bit farther into our leather. Looks real good. That looks real good. And the knots are just inside our bottom piece of leather. We're now ready to move on to a project. We've covered a lot on how to set this machine up. Now let's talk about the operator. Learning this machine is much like learning to drive a car. When you first drove a car, everything was new. You had to use both hands, both feet at the same time. Things were coming at you really fast. Your muscle memory wasn't built in. It was really challenging. You probably even put it in the ditch. I know I did. Driving this machine's a lot the same. Give yourself time to learn how to use it. Give yourself the grace to fail. It's not a natural thing to do, to sit and work with this machine. You have to teach yourself to do it. Much like any tool in the shop, driving a car, any piece of equipment, it takes time to build up the muscle memory and the confidence and the comfort with the machine to use it well. Start your machine speed slow. Set your motor at maybe 1 stitch per second. Stitch with it, backstitch with it, go around corners, play with it. Burn a whole bobbin's worth of thread at 1 stitch per inch. By the time you're done with that first bobbin, you'll be bored out of your mind and you'll be ready to go faster. Bump up your speed a little bit. Start playing with the pedal. Go slow, go fast. Go slow around the corners, fast in the straights. Again, a little bit like driving a car. If you give yourself the time to learn the machine, burn up maybe 2 or 3 or 4 bobbins worth of thread before you start your first project. You'll have a lot more success and a lot less frustration than if you're burning good leather day one. What we're going to do next is go through several examples of how to use the machine, how to stitch, techniques while you're stitching, how to use the different feet and accessories. We're going to have a much better time than oiling and maintaining our machine. We're going to start out with a standard flat piece. This is about a 14-ounce stack of leather. I'm holding tension on my threads while I get started. Just the first 2 or 3 stitches there. That's pretty slow. Putting my finger on my right hand down there, I'm using that as a fence. Now what I'm looking at is the space between the inside of the needle foot and the edge of the leather. I'm keeping my stitch line at about 3/16, and I'm keeping the gap between the needle foot and the edge of the leather at about a 1/16 of an inch. Alright, I'm going to pull my work out. I'm going to take slack up with my right hand. I'm going to reach around there, pull my slack, pull the work out the back just like we did before. Not going to cut my threads, so we're just going to start stitching again. So I'm just going to make sure there's tension when I start. Sorry for giving you the bird there, it's not really intentional. I'm going to take my scissors there, I'm going to give myself a little mark so I can aim at that. That's where I want to turn that corner. Alright, I'm going to make sure I'm right on my mark, run that by hand, go down and come back off the bottom, pick up my foot, spin my work around. Now I'm loosely holding the piece in both hands, letting the machine feed itself. All the human does is steer and guide lightly. I want you to pay attention in how far the top of that holster on the top of your screen moves around as we go around that little curve. We need to make sure we don't have any obstructions. We're paying attention that we're not hitting any pieces of the arm. If we run into an obstruction, it's going to throw off our stitch length. Doing my best to turn the work while the needle is in the leather. If you try and turn it with the needle out of the leather, you're going to change your stitch length. Okay, I'm making sure the back of the holster is not hitting the arm as I go around that inside corner. Now that I'm clear, I can reach over there and give myself a fence again. Give it a little gas. That's probably about 2 stitches per second right there. I think in the earlier segment I called it a stitch per inch. I was a little wrong. Make sure I'm on my right line. Moved my right hand out and re-support it. Anytime you move your hands or let go of the leather, make sure your machine is stopped and your needle's down. It's about an 18-inch piece. And my arms aren't that long, so I'm going to have to curl it up and reposition it a couple times to get it around. You see me leaning over, get around that corner. I'm going to stop, reposition the leather. It's curled up on my chest, and stitch down that back side. Lightly guiding with my left hand. Alright, let's stitch some bullet loops. You can see I've got my bullet loop strip pinned to my leather. I've used a 3/16 push beater to give myself, it makes a nice little decoration, but mostly it gives me a guide of where to start and stop on each side. Okay. Wrap threads around my finger there to help keep some tension on it. Now I'm going to back stitch over the edge of my bullet loop. Come up just a little bit. I'm going to shift, stitch to the other side. Now I'm going to make sure it's going to come up a little bit short. Back up, pick up my foot, turn it around, I'm going to peel my bullet loop back. I'm going to diagonally stitch over to this other hole here on top. And again, I'm going to make really sure that I hit that exact spot. So I want my bullet loops to be parallel to each other. We're just going to stitch across. Nice and slow. Back diagonal to the other side. We go diagonally instead of across top to bottom. So the cartridge itself doesn't wear the thread out as it comes in and out, mostly in, of the bullet loop. Just going to edit all that out. Okay, the main reason I showed you how to do those bullet loops is to show you how to stitch by those bullet loops. You can see on our presser foot here that we have a large offset. Comes down, dog legs in. That's to get around bullet loops and hardware. Alright, So I'm going to do a quick demonstration. I want to back stitch to the edge and then come forward across the top of that same back stitch. So how do we know where to land that last stitch? Quick trick. We're going to take our thread out of our needle. We're going to hand position that first hole. Alright, so no thread, we're just going to punch holes. Alright, now when we rethread our machine, there we go. Now we can put it in reverse. Hold our threads. Line up on the last hole we punched, and backstitch right up to where we want and stop. Now see, we're just going right across the top of those bullet loops. We're not mashing anything, we're not deforming anything. And right up to the end here, coming up off the bottom before we shift. Backstitch right in the same holes. And there we are. Alright, we're going to take off our outside foot and put on our inside foot. Purpose for the inside foot is to do these kinds of molded cases. Anything else that you need to stitch right up against a tall something you get right next to a wall of some sort. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to unscrew our screw. And put that inside foot on. Tiny bit of torque there, just enough to snug it down. Alright, we're going to do the same trick here. We're going to make sure we start and stop exactly where we want to be. Line that up. One more time, Chris. Pay attention. Make sure you know what gear you're in. Alright, now we're going to talk about our double foot. This foot I find most handy doing holster seams. This is a standard Western type holster, belt holster. It has a plug in it. You can see the plug is this dark piece right here. It runs right down and then fades out down here at the bottom and comes back into our holster itself. Of course, the holster has a teardrop shape to it, so you're not stitching on a flat surface right here. You're stitching on a bit of a hill on the outside. It's been my experience that using the double foot makes for a nice, smooth, even stitch. Stitches are straight up and down. No challenges. Using a single foot in this particular application or other similar heavy applications, I think you're moving things around. It's heavy, it's big, it's bulky, so you end up your needle's going crooked. This seems to solve for that. The double foot seems to solve for that. I'm sure there's other makers out there that use this machine that have different experiences and different applications. I'm sure you'll come up with your own. Being a holster maker, this is what I find this foot works the best for. What I'm going to do is go ahead and backstitch the toe. I'm going to use the stitches that are already there, the holes that are there from previous stitches, and I'm going to backstitch. Taking my time to make sure the holes are going to line up. I've adjusted my stitch length to accommodate the thickness of the leather, but it's not a science. I want to make sure when I backstitch I'm going right in the same holes that I stitched when I had the stitch length set for a thinner piece of leather. Just a little bit of caution, a little bit of paying attention. Now I've switched it back into first gear there. I don't need to hold those tails anymore. What I'm going to do is work this from the 3/16 line. On this heavier area, I'm going to go to a 1/4 inch stitch line. Okay, so I'm just going to fade right back in. It so happens that the inside, very inside right here of this foot, to the center line of the needle is a 1/4 inch. So all I have to do is line up the edge of my foot on the edge of my leather, and I know I'm right at a 1/4 inch. It's a nice guide. Okay, here we go. Now remember, we climbed a hill right there, where that piece was skived out in the middle. Now I'm going to fade it back to that 3/16 stitch line to join up with my other line. Right in the same holes. Alright, that thick leather, to get your presser foot to come up, you need to have your needle almost all the way out. But you want to leave it in there so you don't lose your stitch length. And go ahead and come up, turn, we're going to stitch right back down. We're going to run out of bobbin thread. That's what we're going to do. Alright, what happened there when I started missing my stitches, when I turned the corner, the needle turned with the leather, which is my fault for not tightening that screw enough. Stuff that happens, you recover. So what we're going to do, we've pulled the erroneous thread out, we're going to start over. Since we're in a corner, we're going to start back a couple stitches from our corner, and we're going to stitch right around that corner and go back the way we came. Alright, the needle didn't move that time. How great is that? just overstitch a couple. Lock everything in, and there we go. Okay, you see I've changed out the normal presser and needle feet for the needle feet with all the teeth on the bottom. These big fat boogers. These are for doing sheepskin. Work pretty well on canvas as well. Canvas webbing. Okay. When we have all this nap up here and we're going to stitch with our stitch on top of the nap, we need to make sure we've using this to hold the nap down. We've replaced our needle foot with a big fat one. It has a hole in the middle. If you have that fork on there, it's just going to dig in and catch, and it's going to cause a problem. Okay. Quick example on this. Okay. Alright, now if we were going to stitch this the other direction, we'd have all our nap on the bottom. We'd be worried about it getting hung up in our bobbin assembly and our feed dog and whatnot. What we're going to do is replace that feed dog right there, okay, with this one. This one has the little teeth on it. It's going to help you feed. It's good for, again, for your webbing and whatnot. It helps feed that stuff through there when it's a little slick. And you'll notice it just has a little hole in it as opposed to a long slot. Again, that's to prevent the nap from getting tangled up in things and allows that needle to go back and forth through there with ease. We'll look at the procedure on how to change this feed dog out when we do our top stitch plate. I've installed our edge guide. This is a very useful tool on long, straight items. I don't recommend it a whole lot for things with real tight inside radiuses. It's hard to get around there and keep the stitch length right. It is very handy for doing belts and straps. Okay. As an example of something that's kind of handy if you want to make rows of stitches. It's real nice to keep them even. Again, on long straight items. All those threads there so they don't get tangled up. Okay, now we're going to talk about our stitch plates. We have a top stitch plate, which is for doing getting real close to an edge, and I'll explain why this is important to that here in a second. This is what's called a holster plate, and this is what's called the stirrup plate. We'll go through each one of these one at a time. Let's go ahead and install our top stitch plate. To do this, you can see there's no room for the feed dog to come up inside the plate like it does on this stitch plate. You can also see that this hole, this oblong hole in our feed dog, is wider than the one in our top stitch plate. What this allows us to do is stitch, if we use this kind of flouncy thin leather, it's chap leather here, and we come over here and we try and stitch real close to the edge, it's going to push the edge of the leather down inside that hole, and it's not going to give us a very good stitch. So if we use this top stitch plate, it's much narrower, Gives our edge of our leather something to sit on, makes a much finer stitch. To do this, we have to take this feed dog out and get it out of the way. Alright, let's remove our feed dog so we can use our assortment of stitch plates. First thing we need to do is take the stitch plate off that we're going to replace. Take that off of there. Now when we remove the feed dog, we'll be taking it out through the top. I've got my shuttle positioned in such a way that I can access the screw with my screwdriver. To do that, we keep the tension arm all the way to the bottom. Okay? And that'll keep that shuttle in the position we need it to be in to access that screw. See if we can do this without blocking the camera. Alright, so as I'm unscrewing the screw here, I'm pulling the feed dog forward. That way it kind of catches that screw. And if you do drop the screw down in there, just take the plate or the shuttle assembly off, and we pull it right out the top, just like that. Now we can install our other stitch plates. Okay, using this stitch plate, not a whole lot different than a regular stitch, but without that feed dog in there to help the machine feed the leather, it kind of forces the maker to have to kind of help the leather through just a little bit. This takes some practice. You kind of got to get in rhythm with the machine. If you pull too hard, your stitch lengths are going to be inconsistent. If you don't pull enough, they're going to be real short. You can adjust your stitch length to be longer. Kind of like when you're going on a thick leather, you can adjust your machine to go have a longer stitch with a resulting similar stitch to what you had when you had a feed dog in it. We'll go ahead and buzz one out here just to show you kind of how it works. We get right on the edge there because we can get real close to that edge. It's real nice doing wallets, fine belts. Get right up close to that edge. Just like so. Okay, this is our holster plate. It's called a holster plate because we use it to make holsters. Alright, you can see on this holster, this is your standard Avenger style holster. It has this big belt loop on the back of it. Makes it kind of hard to stitch around in the circle. We stitch this in a big circle. Okay, so to do that, we have to be able to get the holster through the back of the machine. In an effort to do that, we have to raise it up so we're not hitting this boss over here. Okay, so we raise the holster up. It's also good for getting around hardware. You want the hardware on the back, the stitch on the top. Well, you can't get close enough without putting this plate on there. This allows us to get right up next to that hardware and stitch. Okay? This is the example we're going to do today. Now I've lengthened my stitch to accommodate the taller plate. It's no different than stacking leather in there. The machine doesn't care why there's more material in here. It just cares that there is. Okay? So now we can stitch around this piece of hardware without it obstructing us. is going to be just a touch long. That's okay. Alright, let's talk briefly about our stirrup plate. We can see that it's fairly short this way. It's got a nice round arc on it here. What this is going to do is allow us to get into corners, okay, a little bit, and stitch around those corners. I'm sorry I don't have an example for you on this one. All the same rules apply, same rules, same techniques as the other plates that are missing the feed dog. This certainly, you definitely want to take the feed dog out. It'll crash together if you don't. But that is if you're doing gussets on a bag inside a stirrup, as the name of the part implies. This is what you'd use. Alright, let's go ahead and reinstall our feed dog. I have no plate at all on top of the machine right now. I'm going to install the dog from the top into the slot that it fits in. There we go. And it will just sit there and rest just like it sits right there. I've got a mechanical screw starter. If you don't have one of these, grab a magnetic screwdriver, something that can hold that screw on the end of the driver for you. You're not going to feed it by hand. Got it started. We'll switch to a regular screwdriver. Now we can reinstall our plate. And we're back where we were before. Okay, so you're stitching along, and all of a sudden you look at the back of your work and you see all the knots are falling out the back. What's likely happened is you've got a tangle in your bobbin thread, or your bobbin is simply just in backwards. If you put your bobbin in backwards, it's going to dramatically change the tension in the bottom, and it's going to make all your knots fall out the back. That's usually what it is. Occasionally, maybe a thread gets caught in the cover as you're putting it back on, something in this nature. Check your thread path on the bottom. Okay, we put our work in and we're stitching along, and we notice all the knots this time they're coming out the top. This looks like one solid white line with no holes because it's filled with knots. What happened? Oh my God. What's likely happened is the last time you took your work out, you pulled your slack and you got it hooked around a tension screw, or you got it hooked around that little doodad there. That's usually what it is. It's a tangle somewhere. Follow your thread path back until you figure that tangle and straighten it out. There was an instance I was stitching along, and all of a sudden, in the middle of a stitch, the knot started blowing out the top. I look up, and I actually see my spool hanging here off of a knot. Well, gosh, the weight of this spool is sure going to change the tension in your machine. It's going to cause all those knots to come right up on top. So if your knots aren't where they're supposed to be, you can see them. They were adjusted before. You haven't done anything to the machine. Check your thread path. Okay, so now you're stitching along and everything's fine. And you backstitch, and all of a sudden you look at it and there's just this big nest of stuff. The back, everything of the stitch is okay, but the back stitch is just a big mess, and oh my god, right? Typically what that is caused by is the original knot that you put in there is sitting right under the grain of the leather. It's not in the middle where it's supposed to be. It's just inside the grain. You can't really see it unless you're really looking for it. So you think your tension's okay, but it's really not. And then what happens when you backstitch, the second knot tries to get inside that leather. It doesn't have anywhere to go because the first knot's in the way. So it hangs out the bottom. If it hangs out the bottom far enough, it's going to actually cause a tangle and jam up your machine. So this is where we go back to the tension chapter and we make sure our knot's right in the middle. The other thing that can cause any